In the year 1936, on a rain-lashed night in October, the most vital wireless message ever transmitted from British soil was never heard. At precisely 11 minutes past midnight, Sir Gervase Chevenix pressed the great silver key of his new transmitter and died. No wound, no cry, only the faint smell of bitter almonds that was not cyanide and the soft hiss of headphones still warm upon his ears. Hercule Poirot, dining 30 miles away in London, laid down his fork. "Mon ami," he murmured to Captain Hastings, "somebody has just murdered the future." Chapter 1. The House That Listened to the World. The night of the 14th of October, 1936, was not a night for ordinary men to be abroad. A westerly gale, straight from the Atlantic, flung itself against the chalk cliffs of the Sussex Downs, and howled across the high, lonely pasture like a thing bereaved. Rain came in solid sheets, silver under the moon when the clouds parted, black as ink when they closed again. And upon the highest ridge of all, 400 feet above the unseen sea, the new steel-latticed tower of Abbott's Hollow rose gaunt and white, its red aircraft lamp blinking with slow, deliberate solemnity, as though warning the very heavens to keep their distance. From the London road, the house itself could not be seen until the last moment. Then it appeared all at once, a long Tudor front of mellow brick pierced by 100 glowing windows, flanked on the north by a monstrous modern wing of glass and concrete that looked as if it had been dropped there by an indifferent giant. That wing housed the transmitting hall of the vital connection, and tonight, for the first time, the world was going to hear it speak. Inside the great porch, footmen in dark green livery took coats sodden with rain and murmured polite astonishment at the celebrity of the arrivals. There was the Under-Secretary for Air, the chairman of Imperial Wireless, 2 directors of the Marconi Company, a famous aviatrix whose photograph appeared weekly in the Tatler, and, quite inexplicably, Hercule Poirot, moustache impeccable, patent leather shoes shining like black mirrors despite the weather. He had been promised, by letter, the finest soufflé au fromage in the south of England, and for Poirot that was excuse enough to travel 30 miles in a downpour. Captain Hastings, trailing behind with 2 suitcases and a look of martyred resignation, muttered, "I still don't see why we couldn't have come down tomorrow, Poirot. The demonstration isn't until 11 o'clock. Précisément, Hastings. It is at 11 o'clock that the soufflé will be at its most perfect. One does not arrive after the moment of perfection. One arrives in time to observe its creation." They were received in the vaulted hall by Sir Gervase Chevenix himself. Tall, thin, 56 years old, with the stooping shoulders of the habitual scholar and the brilliant, restless eyes of a man who had spent his life listening to voices no one else could hear. His evening dress was faultless, but the bow tie sat a fraction crooked, as though he had knotted it while thinking of something else entirely. "Monsieur Poirot, you lend lustre to my little experiment." He spoke with the clipped, rapid diction of the public schools, yet there was music in it, the music of wireless valves warming up. "Come, let me show you the monster before the others descend upon us." He led them through a baize door, along a corridor lined with humming dynamos, and at last into the transmitting hall itself. The room was a cathedral of steel and glass. In the centre stood the transmitter, a stack of water-cooled triodes as tall as a man, glowing a soft, malevolent purple. Above, thick copper bus bars marched like organ pipes to the ceiling. At the far end, beneath a wall of meters whose needles trembled like nervous racehorses, was the operating desk, mahogany, green leather, and one great silver Morse key that looked as though it had been designed for the hand of Jove. Sir Gervas laid a possessive palm upon it. 250 kilowatts, Monsieur Poirot. Enough to throw a voice across the planet without a single relay station. Tonight, Buenos Aires will hear London as clearly as if Big Ben stood in the Plaza de Mayo. And tomorrow, his eyes shone, tomorrow the Empire will truly never see the sun set, because it will never cease to hear the mother's voice. Poirot inclined his head, the picture of courteous interest, but his gaze had already travelled to the pair of experimental headphones resting on a velvet cushion beside the key. They were unlike any he had seen. The earpieces were of soft red rubber, moulded precisely to the human ear, and from each dangled a thin insulated wire that vanished into the circuitry. "These," said Sir Gervais, noticing the direction of his glance, "are my particular vanity." They returned the operator's own modulated voice from the ionosphere, delayed by perhaps a seventh of a second. One hears oneself speaking from 80 miles up as God might. I shall wear them at the moment supreme. A faint smell of ozone hung in the air, and beneath it something sweeter, more insidious, bitter almonds perhaps, or the ghost of a scent memory. Poirot's nostrils flared, his moustache gave the tiniest quiver. But he merely smiled and said, "You will permit an old man his curiosity. The delay of 1/7 of a second. C'est beaucoup?" "Enough," said Sir Gervas, "for a man to fall in love with the sound of his own immortality." Dinner was announced. They passed into the long gallery where Holbeins and Lely Beauties looked down in frozen disapproval at the company assembling beneath them. There were 16 in all, and Poirot catalogued them with the speed and precision of a man who has spent a lifetime arranging human beings into patterns. Lady Chevenix still beautiful at 42, diamonds flashing like semaphore lamps at her throat. Miss Ruth Chevenix, the ward. 22, pale, intense, dressed in black velvet that made her look like a morning candle. Hugo Trent, the secretary, too handsome, too aware of it, with a guard's tie and restless fingers. Venetia Kerr, the aviatrix, cropped bronze hair. Scarlet frock, a laugh like an aircraft engine turning over. Major Otto von Richter, representing certain Swiss interests, whose German accent grew thicker whenever he was nervous. Dr. Quentin Halcombe, the house physician, soft, plump, smelling faintly of carbolic. And the others, civil servants, engineers, a bishop who had come to bless the enterprise, all of them circling Sir Gervais like satellites around a bright, unstable sun. The meal was everything promised. The soufflé rose like a golden cumulus. The 29 Chateau d'Yquem was liquid sunlight. Yet Poirot, who could detect a flawed Béarnaise at 20 paces, found himself distracted. Ruth Chevenix scarcely touched her food. Her eyes, dark and enormous, never left her guardian's face. Twice Sir Gervais raised his glass to her with particular tenderness, and twice she looked away as though the sight hurt her. At 11:15, the party moved, by common consent, toward the transmitting hall. The great valves had been warming for hours. The room now thrummed with a subdued power, like a caged thunderstorm. Technicians in white overalls made last adjustments. A BBC announcer, nervous and reverent, tested his microphone. The long hand of the wall clock crept toward the vertical. Sir Gervais took his place at the operating desk. With something of ceremony he lifted the headphones and settled them over his iron-grey hair. The red rubber cups enclosed his ears completely. He adjusted them once, fastidiously, then smiled at the assembled company. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and his voice came simultaneously from the loudspeaker above their heads, round and perfect, In precisely 2 minutes, the world will change a little. I dedicate this first signal to the youth of Britain, that they may never feel distant from one another again." He laid his right hand upon the silver key. The room fell silent save for the low hum of the valves and the ticking of the clock. Hastings, standing just behind Poirot, felt the hairs rise on his neck. There is a moment before any great enterprise when the future seems to hold its breath. 11:11 exactly. Sir Gervase pressed the key. For one heartbeat the meters leapt, needles slamming against their stops. The air filled with a deep visceral thrumming that was felt in the bones rather than heard. From the loudspeaker poured the opening bars of "God Save the King," relayed instantly to the aerial atop the tower. Then, without drama, without a cry, Sir Gervase Chevenix folded forward across the desk as gently as a man bowing to an emperor. The headphones remained in place, the silver key still depressed beneath his hand. The national anthem continued for 4 more bars before a technician, white-faced, cut the carrier wave. Dr. Halcombe pushed through the press of bodies. "Let me through! I'm a doctor!" He lifted Sir Gervase's head, felt for the pulse at the throat, then at the wrist. His own hands trembled. "He's gone," he said, and the words fell into the sudden silence like stones into a well. Lady Chevenix gave one short stifled scream. Ruth Chevenix stood as though carved from salt, staring at the body with an expression it was impossible to read. Venetia Kerr turned away, pressing a scarlet handkerchief to her lips. Major von Richter's monocle fell with a faint tinkle to the polished floor. Poirot alone moved forward. He touched nothing, yet his eyes were everywhere. The angle of the head, the headphones still in place, the faint curious smell that hung about the corpse. Not bitter almonds after all, but something closer, more floral. Foxgloves, perhaps. He bent close to the dead man's ear, the right ear, and with the delicacy of a man lifting a rare butterfly, eased the rubber cup a fraction away from the skin. A single bead of clear fluid, no larger than a pinhead, trembled on the edge of the auditory canal. Poirot straightened. His voice, when it came, was soft yet carried to every corner of the hushed room. "Messieurs et dames," he said, "somebody has just murdered the future." And from the now silent loudspeaker, as though in mocking answer, there drifted a whisper so low that only Poirot and Hastings heard it. A voice speaking in perfect icy German. "Der Verkauf ist abgeschlossen." The sale is complete, then nothing. Only the smell of ozone and of something sweeter, and the rain hurling itself endlessly against the glass. Chapter 2. The 5 Who Profited by Silence. The library at Abbott's Hollow smelled of old leather, peat smoke, and fear. A vast Tudor fireplace roared, yet no one felt warm. 16 people stood or sat in attitudes of studied calm, while Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, summoned by frantic telephone at midnight, tramped about with the delicacy of a rhinoceros in ballet shoes. Hercule Poirot had taken command with the quiet certainty of a man slipping into a familiar coat. He stood upon the hearthrug, small, compact, immaculate, hands clasped behind his back, green eyes moving from face to face like searchlights. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we have a murder most interesting. Sir Gervase is dead by poison. Digitalin, I fancy, introduced directly into the ear while he wore the headphones." Death was almost instantaneous. The field of suspects is charmingly restricted. Only 8 persons, besides the technicians who never approached within 10 feet, were inside the transmitting hall after the doors were closed at 10:45. The doors were then locked until the moment of catastrophe. Ergo, the murderer is one of us. He let the silence stretch until it vibrated like a plucked wire. Inspector Japp cleared his throat. "Look here, Mr. Poirot. We've wirelessed London. This has Foreign Office written all over it. That German phrase, 'The sale is complete,' and the major fellow being Swiss, in the way I'm the King of Siam. Espionage, clear as daylight." Poirot's smile was wintry. Espionage, perhaps. Murder, certainly. But let us not confuse the two until the little grey cells have spoken. He turned to the company. "For the convenience of Inspector Japp, I present the 5 persons who profit most conspicuously by Sir Gervaise's silence." He raised one manicured finger. "Number 1, Lady Chevenix. By the will of 1934 she inherits £400,000 and the London house. A motive classique." Lady Chevenix lifted her chin. "I have not left the drawing-room since dinner. Ask anyone." "Number 2, continued Poirot imperturbably, "Miss Ruth Chevenix, ward and heiress to the patents themselves, worth millions if the invention is sold commercially. Lately there has been friction. Sir Gervais spoke of disinheriting her only yesterday." Ruth's face was bloodless. "I loved him," she said, in a voice that barely stirred the air. "He was my father in every way but blood." Number 3, Mr. Hugo Trent, private secretary. Dismissed yesterday for carelessness. A carelessness that included, I believe, forging his employer's signature on certain documents. A young man with debts at several undesirable establishments. Hugo flushed crimson. "I was in the control room with the engineers from 10:30 onward. They will vouch for me." Number 4, Miss Venetia Kerr. Poirot bowed slightly toward the aviatrix, who met his gaze with cool defiance. Until 3 weeks ago, the fiancée of Sir Gervais. The engagement was broken when he discovered a certain weekend in Biarritz with a Polish count. Miss Kerr now returns to comparative poverty. Revenge is not always financial, n'est-ce pas? Venetia laughed, a hard, bright sound. "I was drinking Kümmel with the Under-Secretary at the fatal moment. He will confirm it, and blush." "Finally," said Poirot, "Major Otto von Richter, who claims to represent Swiss capital, but whose passport was issued in Leipzig last month. 2 million Reichsmarks were to be paid into a numbered account in Zurich tomorrow morning for the plans of the vital connection. With Sir Gervais dead, the deal dies also, unless someone else is prepared to sign." The Major's monocle flashed. "You insult me, monsieur. I am a businessman." "You are a spy," said Japp cheerfully, "and you're coming with me." Von Richter shrugged with magnificent disdain. "I left the transmitting hall at 11:05, precisely to telephone my principals. The call is recorded at the exchange. You will find I was speaking until 11:09. Impossible to return, Poison Sir Gervais, and be back on the telephone. I regret. Your English logic collapses." Poirot's eyes glittered. "On the contrary, Major. It is the first honest alibi we possess. I am delighted." He clapped his hands once, softly. "Now, certain small matters. The headphones have disappeared. Curious, when no one admits to touching the body. Also, the house is searched for the instrument of injection. Nothing. And yet Digitalin does not inject itself." He moved to the great oriel window that looked toward the tower. Rain still slashed the glass. The red aircraft lamp blinked with monotonous patience. "Captain Hastings and I will retire. Inspector Japp will take statements. I recommend that no one leaves the house tonight. Tomorrow the fingerprints, the autopsy, the little grey cells, all will be very busy." As the company began to disperse in uneasy knots, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Come, mon ami, we have work." They slipped out by a side door into the storm. The gravel path to the tower was a running stream, but Poirot moved swiftly, lantern shielded beneath his cape. At the foot of the lattice they paused. The door to the ladder was locked, yet the padlock hung open, bright metal scarred as though by a file. "Someone has been here tonight," murmured Poirot. They climbed. 400 feet of steel rungs in the howling dark. Hastings's breath rasped, his gloves slipped with wet, but Poirot ascended with the neatness of a cat. At the top platform, lashed by wind that threatened to tear them into the night, the lantern revealed fresh confusion in the frost. Footprints, small, neat, a woman's shoe, leading to the insulator hut, then away again toward the downslope of the hill. Poirot knelt, shielding the light. Something glistered among the rime. A single drop of blood, already freezing into a tiny ruby. From the hut itself came a faint sound, rhythmic, almost lost beneath the wind. Click, 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 click. Morse. Hastings felt the hair rise on his scalp. "Good God, Poirot! Someone's transmitting!" Poirot's face, lit from below, was carved granite. "No, mon ami, someone is listening." He pushed open the hut door. Inside, wired directly into the aerial feeder, were the missing headphones, red rubber cups dark and secret against the night. And from them, thin as a ghost's breath, came a voice speaking in German. "Der Adler ist tot. Wiederhole, der Adler ist tot. The eagle is dead." Poirot's hand shot out and cut the connection. In the sudden silence, the wind sounded almost human. Far below, a window of the house blazed briefly as someone looked out toward the tower, then went dark again. Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Ionosphere. At 3:17 in the morning, the house should have been asleep, or pretending to be. Instead, every light burned, and the corridors echoed with the nervous footsteps of constables, and the low, indignant voices of guests who had expected a demonstration of science and received a demonstration of mortality. Poirot and Hastings descended from the tower soaked to the skin, the headphones wrapped in Poirot's silk handkerchief and carried like a sleeping adder. In the entrance hall, Inspector Japp met them, his bowler dripping. "Well?" he demanded. Poirot lifted the bundle. "The murder weapon, I fancy. Also the murderer's tongue. Someone wished us to hear that the eagle is dead." Japp scratched his chin. "German again. Foreign Office will have kittens." "First," said Poirot, "we have a small experiment." He led the way back to the transmitting hall. The great valves still glowed faintly, cooling with reluctant sighs. The operating desk remained exactly as death had left it. The silver key depressed, Sir Gervaise's body removed to the billiard room on a makeshift bier, a chalk outline marking where genius had bowed out. Poirot laid the headphones gently upon the green leather. The red rubber cups looked innocent now, almost childish. "Captain Hastings, you will oblige me by sitting." Hastings sat feeling foolish. Poirot himself took the engineer's chair at the control panel. With deliberate care, he threw the main switches. The valves brightened, the room filled again with that deep, bone-felt thrumming. "Observe," said Poirot. He pressed the tuning knob. At once the loudspeaker came alive, not with music or speech, but with a recorded voice, unmistakably Sir Gervaise's own, yet strangely distant, as though echoing down a very long corridor. "If you are hearing this message, then I am already dead. The traitor is static exploded, savage and deliberate swallowing the name." The recording looped, began again. "If you are hearing this message." Poirot cut the carrier wave. Silence rushed back. "Mon Dieu," whispered Hastings. "He knew." "Or feared," corrected Poirot. The recording was cut into a wax cylinder and wired to trigger automatically if the aerial received a certain coded pulse. Someone sent that pulse from the tower after midnight. Someone wished us to believe Sir Gervais named his killer from beyond the grave. Japp snorted. Clever stuff. But the engineers swear the transmitter was disconnected at the mains. Disconnected here, said Poirot, tapping the panel, but not up there. He pointed through the window toward the skeletal tower, its red lamp still winking against the racing clouds. Come. They climbed again, this time with 2 constables and powerful electric torches. The wind had eased a little. The rain had become a cold, drifting mist that blurred the beams into cones of pearl. At the platform, they found what Poirot expected. A makeshift relay, no larger than a cigarette tin, clamped to the feeder line. From it ran a thin wire down the inside of the tower leg, cleverly concealed among the guy ropes, into the darkness below. Someone has turned the entire aerial into a microphone, Poirot murmured. Every word spoken in the transmitting hall after death was heard up here and could be rebroadcast at will. Hastings shivered. Gives one the creeps. Like the house itself is listening. Precisely, mon ami. And houses, like people, sometimes repeat what they should forget. In the insulator hut, they discovered further treasures. A torn page from a botanical catalogue, foxglove culture and its medicinal uses, circled in red ink around the word digitalin. Beside it, half burned in a cocoa tin, the remnants of a woman's kid glove, the button still bearing the crest of a fashionable London shop. Poirot pocketed both fragments with satisfaction. Downstairs again, dawn was beginning to leach the colour from the sky. The party had been herded into the morning room under the sullen guardianship of constables. Ruth Chevenix sat apart, hands clenched in her lap, staring at nothing. Venetia Kerr smoked one cigarette after another. Hugo Trent had been sick in the cloakroom and now looked green and defiant. Lady Chevenix lay upstairs under sedation. Only Major von Richter seemed almost cheerful, humming a little waltz under his breath, as though murder were a minor inconvenience. Poirot paused in the doorway. Every face turned toward him like flowers to a cold sun. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "the dead have spoken once tonight. They may speak again. I require that no one, absolutely no one, approaches the transmitting hall until I give permission. Captain Hastings and I will take coffee. Very hot, very black, and in complete solitude." In the small study that had been Sir Gervas's private retreat, Poirot sank into a leather chair and closed his eyes. Reflect, Hastings. Digitalin, extract of foxglove, acts in seconds when introduced directly into the bloodstream. The headphones provided the perfect channel, but the dose must be precise. Too little, and the victim cries out. Too much, and the smell of almonds is overwhelming. Our murderer is either a doctor or someone with access to a doctor's knowledge. He opened his eyes suddenly. The ghost message was meant to point toward the Major. Yet the Major's alibi is, as he boasted, unbreakable. Therefore the message is a red herring. Someone wishes us to look abroad when we should look at home. A tap at the door. Dr. Halcombe entered, plump and flustered, carrying his black bag. "I thought you should know, Mr. Poirot. The post-mortem will confirm digitalin, I've no doubt. But there's something odd. The injection entered the right ear." Hastings frowned. So, Sir Gervais was deaf in the left ear since the Somme. He always wore headphones reversed, left cup over right ear and vice versa. Someone who knew him intimately would have known that. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Someone who loved him, perhaps, or someone who hated him enough to study his smallest habits. From the transmitting hall, carried faintly along the corridors, came once again that recorded voice, closer now, almost pleading, "Still among you." The lights flickered. Somewhere a woman screamed. Poirot was already on his feet. Chapter 4. The Poisoned Ear. The scream belonged to the housemaid who had been sent to fetch fresh candles. She had found the transmitting hall door ajar, the lights blazing, and the great silver key rising and falling of its own accord. Tap, 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 like a dead man trying to send one final message. When Poirot arrived, breathless, the key was still. Only the faint smell of ozone and the lingering echo of that ghostly voice remained. "Someone plays with us," Poirot said grimly, "and someone grows nervous." He ordered the hall sealed, 2 constables posted, and the entire household assembled in the long gallery at 10 o'clock sharp. The storm had blown itself out. Pale autumn sunshine now lay across the lawns like a guilty secret. Sir Gervaise's body lay in the billiard-room under a Union Jack, awaiting the coroner's van. The chalk outline on the operating desk had been photographed, measured, and prayed over by an embarrassed bishop. Dr. Halcombe, fortified by several cups of black coffee, delivered his preliminary findings to Poirot, Japp, and Hastings in the gun-room. Digitalin, as you surmised, Mr. Poirot. A massive dose, 0.08 grams, I should say, introduced through a hollow needle no thicker than a darning needle. The puncture is in the external, he hesitated, in the right auditory canal. The left ear shows no mark. Curious, as I told you last night. Sir Gervais always reversed the headphones because of his deafness. The murderer either did not know that, or wished us to believe he did not know. Poirot nodded slowly. Continue. Death within 20 to 30 seconds, no struggle. The victim simply folded. The headphones were pressed tightly. The rubber is still faintly stained with the solution. I found traces of gum arabic in the residue, used to thicken the digitalin so it would not run too quickly. Clever, professional almost. Japp grunted. Professional spy, more like. Or professional nurse, said Poirot softly. Halcombe flushed. I treated Sir Gervais for his heart for years. I kept digitalin in the surgery, of course. The cupboard was forced last night. An ampule is missing. Poirot thanked him and dismissed him with old-world courtesy. When the door closed, he turned to Japp. Now we reconstruct. Hastings, you will be the corpse. Despite protests, Hastings found himself seated at the operating desk, replica headphones clamped over his ears. Poirot took the engineer's position. Observe, at 11:10 the doors are locked. At 11:11 Sir Gervais presses the key. If the injection is to occur at the precise moment of transmission, there must be a triggering mechanism. A spring, a solenoid, something that reacts to the sudden surge of current. He pressed the key himself. Somewhere in the depths of the transmitter, a relay clicked. Once, distinctly. Poirot's eyes gleamed. There! You heard it! The click is audible even through the headphones. The killer built a tiny hypodermic into the right earpiece connected to a magnetic release. When the carrier wave surges, click, the needle darts forward. The dose is delivered, the needle retracts, the evidence vanishes with the headphones. Elegant. Murder by wireless. Japp whistled. But the headphones are found on the tower. No mechanism inside. Exactly, said Poirot, because the murderer removed the device immediately after death and substituted ordinary headphones. A substitution made in the dark, in the panic. Yet even in panic, one may err. He lifted the replica pair Hastings still wore. Inside the right rubber cup, almost invisible, was a minute scar, no longer than a pin scratch, where a needle had once protruded. Regardez. The mark remains. The murderer was clever, but not clever enough for Hercule Poirot. At 11 o'clock, the suspects filed into the long gallery. They looked as though they had not slept. Even Venetia Kerr's lipstick seemed tired. Major von Richter had been allowed to change into a civilian suit, but remained under guard. Ruth Chevenix walked like a sleepwalker, supported by Hugo Trant, whose own face was the colour of old parchment. Poirot stood beneath a brooding portrait of a Chevenix ancestor in armour. Mesdames et messieurs, the method is now clear. A hypodermic needle hidden in the headphone, triggered by the very act of transmission. Only 6 persons entered the transmitting hall between 10:45 and 11:11. He counted them off on his fingers. Lady Chevenix, bringing her husband a glass of barley water at 10:52. Dr. Halcombe, checking Sir Gervas's pulse at 10:55. Hugo Trent, delivering a final cable at 10:58. Miss Ruth Chevenix, seen by a maid entering at 11:03 and leaving at 11:05. Miss Venetia Kerr, passing through to fetch her wrap at 11:07. Major von Richter, already accounted for. A ripple of unease ran through the room. Each of you had perhaps 30 seconds alone with the desk, time enough to slip the prepared headphones into place. Yet all of you swear you touched nothing. One of you lies. He paused, letting the silence do its work. Furthermore, the missing mechanism must still be in this house. A glass syringe, a coil of wire, a tiny solenoid no larger than a cotton reel. I have ordered every room searched again. It will be found, Ruth Chevenix swayed. Hugo caught her elbow, but she pulled away violently. Don't touch me. Her voice cracked like a whip. None of you understand. He promised me. He promised. He would never sell to them. She stared round at the circle of faces, eyes wild, then pressed both hands to her mouth as though to force the words back inside. Tears, real, tearing, uncontrollable, poured down her cheeks. Poirot watched her with infinite compassion. Mademoiselle, he said gently, you speak of promises. Tell me, when did Sir Gervas break this promise to you? But Ruth could only shake her head, sobbing, while Hugo Trent looked suddenly as though he had been struck. From the corridor came the sound of running feet. A sergeant burst in, triumph on his ruddy face. Mr. Poirot, sir! In the grandfather clock, in the west passage, behind the pendulum. This! He held up a small, glittering object. A glass vial, a coil of copper wire, a needle no longer than a rose thorn, still stained with a trace of milky fluid. Poirot took it almost reverently. Behold, he said quietly, the heart of the matter. And observe, the clock has been set 6 minutes fast. Someone wished the murder to occur at precisely 11:11, even if the victim himself was late in pressing the key. He turned the tiny mechanism over in his palm. Murder, he said, is never punctual, but murderers sometimes are. Ruth Chevenix fainted clean away. Hugo Trent caught her this time, and no one moved to stop him. Chapter 5. The Major Who Wasn't Swiss. The fog came down at noon, thick and yellow as old parchment, swallowing the tower whole. From the library windows, only the red aircraft lamp could be seen, winking like a dying coal. Inside, the house felt smaller, the walls pressing inward, every creak of the old beams sounding like a confession. Major Otto von Richter had decided to leave. He made the attempt with Teutonic efficiency. A fast Austin swallowed up by the fog, a forged Home Office pass, and a confident smile for the young constable guarding the gate. The smile lasted exactly 4 miles, until a police Riley, siren screaming, overtook him on the Lewis Road and forced him onto the verge. Von Richter tried to run across a ploughed field. A sergeant with a 12-bore brought him down as neatly as a pheasant. By 3 o'clock, he was back at Abbott's Hollow, minus his dignity and plus a pair of handcuffs. Inspector Japp was positively beaming. Real name Oberstleutnant Otto von Richter, Abwehr Section the 3. Passport forged in Hamburg. 2 million Reichsmarks already transferred to a Zurich bank against delivery of the plans. Court bang to rights. Von Richter, monocle restored, looked bored. I have diplomatic immunity. You have a diplomatic headache, Japp retorted, and a charge of conspiracy to murder. Poirot, who had watched the entire performance from the morning room window, merely raised an eyebrow. Congratulations, mon cher Japp. You have caught a spy. Now perhaps you will permit me to catch a murderer. He led the way to the billiard room, where Sir Gervais lay beneath the Union Jack, waxen and remote. The room smelled of camphor and candle smoke. Poirot drew back the flag with ceremonial gravity. Regardez, the right ear, the ear that still heard. The left ear, deaf since 1916, yet unmarked. The murderer knew exactly which ear would receive the rubber cup. This was no stranger's crime. He turned to the prisoner. Major, you left the transmitting hall at 11:05 to telephone Berlin. The exchange records the call from 11:05 until 11:09. At 11:11, Sir Gervais died. You could not return unseen, poison him, and resume your conversation. Your alibi is iron. Von Richter permitted himself a thin smile. Precisely, monsieur. I am innocent. Innocent of murder, said Poirot, but not, perhaps, of providing the occasion for it. He produced from his pocket a sheet of onion-skin paper, thin, almost transparent, covered with columns of figures and cryptic initials. Found in your room, Major, a draft contract. Delivery of the vital connection plans within 48 hours of Sir Gervais's signature. Payment in gold. Yet the signature line is blank. Why? Von Richter shrugged. Sir Gervais was reconsidering. Reconsidering because a certain young lady had persuaded him that selling to the Reich would be treason? Ruth Chevenix, who had been sitting white-faced on a leather sofa, flinched as though struck. Poirot's voice softened. Mademoiselle Ruth discovered the negotiations 3 weeks ago. She confronted her guardian. There were scenes, tears, ultimately an ultimatum. Sir Gervais loved her too much to lose her. Yesterday morning he telephoned the German embassy and cancelled the arrangement. He told no one except his solicitor, and changed his will. Japp stared. Changed his will. Poirot produced a second document. Heavy cream paper, red seal still warm from the lawyer's bag. Executed yesterday at 11 o'clock in Brighton. In the event of his death before midnight tonight, the patents of the vital connection passed not to Miss Ruth, nor to Lady Chevenix, but to His Majesty's government for the defence of the realm. A deathbed conversion, one might say. The silence in the room was absolute. Hugo Trent laughed suddenly, a cracked, hysterical sound. Then Ruth loses everything, millions, gone. Ruth rose slowly. I would have lost him, she said simply. That was the only thing that mattered. Venetia Kerr stubbed out her cigarette with unnecessary violence. How very noble, and how very convenient for England. Poirot ignored her. He was studying the Major with clinical interest. You, Herr Oberstleutnant, were informed of the cancellation at 11:04 last night, during your telephone call. You left the line open, yes? A pretense of continuing negotiation while you digested the news? At 11:11 Sir Gervais died. The deal died with him. You lost 2 million Reichsmarks and a strategic triumph. Yet you seem almost relieved. Von Richter met his gaze steadily. Some losses are preferable to certain entanglements. Entanglements, such as being framed for murder? Exactly. Poirot turned to the room at large. Someone wished us to believe the Germans killed Sir Gervase to silence him. The German phrases broadcast after death, the Major's presence, the forged contract left carelessly in his room, all point one way. But the method, the intimate, ingenious method, screams of an Englishman. Or woman, someone who knew Sir Gervase's habits, his deafness, his vanity about those headphones. Someone who loved him enough to hate what he was doing. Dr. Halcombe cleared his throat nervously. There's something else, Mr. Poirot. The digital in ampule, the one stolen from my surgery. I found the broken glass in the wastepaper basket this morning, wrapped in a sheet of notepaper. The notepaper is from Miss Ruth's desk. Her monogram, watermarked. Ruth stared at him as though he had spoken in tongues. I never, she began, then stopped. Her hands flew to her throat. Poirot watched her with infinite sadness. Mademoiselle, he said gently, you have fought a brave campaign against what you believed was treason. Anonymous letters, slashed tires, rumours in Whitehall. You did everything short of murder to stop the sale. And then, yesterday, you learned that your guardian had already repented. That he had given the invention to England after all. The campaign was unnecessary. The quarrel was needless. The pain you caused him, unforgivable. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. He forgave me, she whispered. Last night, he forgave me. That is why he wore the headphones reversed. He wanted me to see that he still trusted me, even after everything. She sank back onto the sofa, weeping without sound. Poirot turned away. Outside the window, the fog was lifting. The tower stood clear again, the aerial glittering like a threat. Someone, he said quietly, could not bear that forgiveness. Someone preferred Sir Gervase, dead and dishonoured, rather than alive and repentant. We are no longer looking for a traitor. We are looking for a patriot who loved too much. From the transmitting hall, faint but unmistakable, came 3 short bursts of Morse. SOS. The lights flickered once and steadied. Poirot's face was very still. The house, he murmured, is trying to tell us something. Chapter 6. The Ward's Confession. The house would not be silent. At 6:30, just as a watery dusk settled over the downs, every loudspeaker in Abbott's Hollow crackled into life at once. From the long gallery to the scullery, from the billiard room to the servants' hall, the same recorded voice drifted, thin and despairing. Ruth, forgive me. I should never have doubted you. Then a burst of static, and the unmistakable sound of a man weeping. The effect was electric. Maids screamed. A constable crossed himself. Lady Chevenix, descending the great staircase in a dressing gown, fainted into the arms of Inspector Japp. Only Ruth Chevenix stood motionless in the doorway of the morning room, face bone-white, hands pressed to her ears as though she could push the voice back into the grave. Poirot moved faster than anyone would have thought possible. He ran, not to the transmitting hall, but to the library telephone switchboard in the butler's pantry. One sharp order, and the mains were cut. Silence fell like a guillotine. Whoever does this, he said, panting slightly, has access to every wire in the house. They listen, they speak, they torment. Enough. He turned to Ruth. Mademoiselle, you will come with me, now. She followed him like a child, docile with shock. He led her not to the scene of the crime, but to the little rose-walled garden at the back of the house, where the last light lay tender on the dying Michaelmas daisies. There he made her sit on a stone bench and wrapped his own silk scarf around her shoulders. Speak, he said gently. "All of it. The dead themselves beg you." Ruth stared at her hands. They were trembling. "I tried to kill him," she said at last, so quietly that Poirot had to lean close to hear. "Not his body, his reputation. When I found the draft contract with the Germans, I thought he had sold England for gold. I could not bear it. So I fought him the only way I knew. Anonymous letters to the War Office, sugar in the petrol tanks of the German embassy cars, telephone calls pretending to be his mistress, demanding money. I wanted him ruined, disgraced, forced to choose between his country and his greed. I wanted him to crawl back to decency." She began to cry, harsh, ugly sobs that tore at the throat. "Last night, before the broadcast, he took me into his study. He showed me the new will. He had cancelled everything with Berlin. The invention was England's. He said, 'Little Ruth, I was tempted, yes, but never again. You have saved me.' He forgave me everything. He kissed my forehead like when I was small. And I, God help me, I could not forgive myself." Poirot waited. "I went to my room," she continued. "I took the laudanum Dr. Halcombe keeps for Lady Chevenix's nerves. I meant to drink it all. But first, I wanted to see the broadcast, to see him vindicated before the world. I slipped down the back stairs at 11:03. The headphones were already on the desk. I saw the right cup had a tiny tear in the rubber. Nothing more. I thought it was ordinary wear. I touched his hand for luck, then left. That is all." Poirot's eyes never left her face. "You saw no one?" "No one. And the digitalin? I burned the notepaper from my desk weeks ago. Someone must have kept a sheet. Someone who knew I would be blamed." She lifted her head at last. "I did not kill him, Monsieur Poirot, but I drove him to it. If I had not tormented him, he would never have needed to prove his patriotism with that terrible broadcast. He died to convince the world, and me, that he was still the man I believed in." Poirot was silent a long moment. Then he laid a hand on her bowed head, very lightly. "Courage, mon enfant. The truth is rarely pure and never simple, but it is never too late for it." He stood. "Come, there is one more thing." They found the missing hypodermic device exactly where Poirot expected. Inside the case of the tall Westminster chime clock in the West Passage. The pendulum had been removed. In its place hung a delicate glass phial, a hair-fine needle, and a tiny electromagnet connected by a silk-insulated wire to the clock's striking mechanism. When the hands reached 11:11, or rather 11:17 because the clock had been deliberately set 6 minutes fast, the hammer would close a contact, the magnet would release, and the needle would dart forward into whatever ear was pressed against the headphone at that fatal moment. The phial still held a trace of milky fluid. "Beautiful," Poirot murmured. "Murder by appointment. The victim himself provided the pressure when he leant forward to press the key. The clock did the rest." Japp, arriving with 2 detectives, stared in disbelief. "But who wound the clock? Who set the mechanism?" "That," said Poirot, "is what the little grey cells have been whispering all day." He turned the clock gently. On the inside of the glass door, almost invisible unless you knew to look, were 4 faint fingerprints. Small, delicate, the prints of a woman's right hand. Ruth stared at them. "Not mine," she said steadily. "I am left-handed." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, I noticed." From the end of the passage came the sound of running feet. A constable appeared, hatless, breathless. "Sir! The tower! Someone's climbing the tower again. We saw a light right at the top." Poirot's face hardened. "Quickly. This time we do not climb like English gentlemen. We take the service lift." They ran. The old goods lift, installed for carrying equipment, rattled them upward through the steel lattice. Wind whistled through the open sides. Fog swirled like smoke. At 300 feet, the lift juddered to a halt. 30 feet of vertical ladder remained. Poirot went first, surprisingly agile. Hastings followed, heart hammering. At the platform they found the insulator hut door swinging wide. Inside, a single electric torch lay on the floor, its beam cutting a tunnel through the darkness. Beside it was a woman's kid glove, left hand this time, and a torn sheet of music manuscript. Poirot picked up the manuscript. It was headed in Sir Gervas's own handwriting. Final instructions, play only if I fail to return. And beneath, in the same hand, a single sentence. Tell Ruth the frequency was always hers. The aerial itself was humming, alive again. Somewhere in the fog, 400 feet above England, a carrier wave was singing to the night. Poirot looked out into the blackness. The game, he said quietly, enters its end. Chapter 7. The Wrong Voice. They brought the house to order with military precision. Every door locked from the outside, every telephone line monitored, every window watched. At 10 o'clock on the second night, the remaining suspects were assembled in the transmitting hall itself, seated in a semicircle beneath the great purple valves that still glowed faintly, like dying planets. Poirot stood at the operating desk exactly where Sir Gervas had died 48 hours earlier. On the green leather blotter lay the reassembled murder device, the clock mechanism, the file, the needle, the coil of wire. Beside it, the original headphones, innocent now, red rubber cups turned outward like blind eyes. Inspector Japp and 2 armed constables guarded the doors. Captain Hastings stood behind Poirot, trying to look calm and failing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, voice quiet yet carrying to the steel rafters, "we have reached the moment of truth. The little grey cells have performed their gymnastics. The pattern is complete." He lifted the headphones. "These restored to their exact condition on the night of the crime. The right earpiece contains the hidden needle, triggered by the surge of current when the silver key is pressed. The clock in the passage was set 6 minutes fast so that the hammer would strike at precisely 11:11, releasing the digitalin. Elegant, yes, but flawed, for the murderer overlooked 2 things." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. First, Sir Gervas always wore the headphones reversed because of his deafness. The needle was in the right cup. Had the murderer truly known his victim, the needle would have been in the left. A small stir in the room. Ruth Chevenix drew a sharp breath. "Second," continued Poirot, "the ghostly broadcasts. 3 times the dead man has spoken since his death. Once from the tower, once through every speaker in the house, once in Morse. Yet each time the voice has been fractionally wrong. The breathing pattern, the slight hesitation on the letter S, the way the vowel O is rounded." Sir Gervas had a tiny scar on his lower lip from a fencing accident at Heidelberg in 1904. It gave his speech a distinctive softness. The ghost has no scar. He turned suddenly to Hugo Trent. "Monsieur Trent, you were once a music hall impersonator, the man of 1,000 voices. I believe the bills called you. You can do Sir Gervas to perfection, almost. You did it for the recording found on the wax cylinder. You did it again last night when you broadcast his plea for forgiveness. A cruel touch, that. Designed to drive Mademoiselle Ruth to confess, or to suicide." Hugo had gone very white. "This is absurd. I was with the engineers." "No, monsieur. You were with them until 10:58. Then you delivered a cable, yes, but you did not return to the control room until 11:12. 14 minutes unaccounted for. Time enough to substitute the fatal headphones, to set the clock, to hide in the service, corridor and trigger the later broadcasts from a concealed microphone. Hugo tried to stand. 2 constables pressed him gently but firmly back into his chair. "You forged Sir Gervais's signature on minor documents," Poirot continued relentlessly. "You were in debt. You believed that with Sir Gervais dead and Ruth disinherited by scandal, Lady Chevenix would marry you, and the money would be yours. When the new will was discovered, you changed your plan. You would make Ruth seem the murderer, drive her to confess or worse, and walk away blameless." Venetia Kerr laughed, a hard metallic sound. "Very pretty, Monsieur Poirot. Except Hugo is left-handed. The fingerprints on the clock are right-handed, and the needle entered the right ear. Your entire theory collapses." Poirot bowed. "You are observant, mademoiselle. I congratulate you." He turned back to the company. "Which brings us to the true murderer. The one person who knew Sir Gervais would wear the headphones reversed, and therefore place the needle in the right earpiece, knowing it would become the left when he turned them. The one person whose fingerprints are on the clock, right hand, and who climbed the tower twice to broadcast the false messages. The one person who had access to Digitalin, to the clock mechanism, to every secret of this house." He looked directly at Dr. Quentin Halcombe. The plump doctor started as though shot. "This is outrageous. I have been Sir Gervais's physician for 15 years. "Exactly," said Poirot softly. 15 years of watching him grow rich, while you remained a country practitioner. 15 years of treating his heart, knowing exactly how Digitalin works. 15 years of listening to him boast of selling his invention to the highest bidder, until yesterday, when he told you he had given it to England instead. You could not bear that the money, your money, the reward for years of silent envy, had vanished forever." Halcombe's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "You prepared the headphones weeks ago, when the German sale seemed certain," Poirot continued. "You intended to kill him after the contract was signed and blame the Germans. When he changed his mind, you simply brought forward the date. You set the clock. You triggered the later broadcasts from the surgery. Your footsteps heard by no one because everyone trusts the good doctor. You even planted the notepaper in your own wastebasket to incriminate Ruth, knowing her campaign against the sale made her the perfect scapegoat." Halcombe tried to rise. His legs would not hold him. "The fingerprints," he stammered. "You said a woman's—" "Yours," said Poirot gently, "are remarkably small and fine for a man. The ridge pattern matches exactly the prints on your prescription pad, which I borrowed this afternoon." He produced a sheet of paper. On it, side by side, 2 sets of inked prints. Identical. Halcombe looked round wildly. Every face was turned away from him. "You used Hugo's voice," Poirot concluded, "because you have no gift for impersonation. You forced him to record the messages weeks ago, when he was still in your debt for gambling losses you had quietly paid. A cruel insurance policy." Hugo Trent began to laugh, a high, broken sound. "He told me it was for a surprise party. My God!" Dr. Halcombe made one last effort. "The left-handed business was never a difficulty," Poirot said. "You are ambidextrous. I watched you sign the post-mortem report with your left hand this morning, because your right was bandaged from a burn sustained when you soldered the final connection." He lifted Halcombe's right hand. Beneath the neat bandage, the skin was blistered. Checkmate. Halcombe stared at the burn, then at Poirot, and something inside him collapsed. He began to cry, not loudly, but with the terrible silence of a man who has lost everything in a single moment. From the loudspeaker above their heads came one final sound. Not a voice this time, but 3 soft notes played on a cello. The opening phrase of Elgar's Enigma variation marked Nimrod, Sir Gervais's favourite. The valves dimmed, the great transmitter fell silent at last. Chapter 8. The Tears of Ruth. The house held its breath. For a long minute after Dr. Halcombe's collapse, no one moved. The great valves cooled with soft metallic sighs. The only light came from the low fire in the grate, and the green glow of the meter needle slowly falling to zero. Halcombe sat crumpled forward, face hidden in his blistered hands, shoulders shaking. Japp's constables closed in, but Poirot raised a small, imperative hand. Non, pas encore. He crossed the steel floor until he stood before Ruth Chevenix. She had not wept since the first night. Now her eyes were dry and enormous, in a face that looked suddenly older than her 22 years. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said very gently, "it is finished. The murderer is taken. You may lay down your burden." Ruth looked at him, as though from a great distance. Then she shook her head. Once, slowly. "No, Monsieur Poirot," she said, and her voice was steady, almost wondering. "You have taken the wrong murderer." A ripple ran through the room. Japp half rose. "Now look here." Poirot silenced him with a glance. He did not take his eyes from Ruth's face. "Continuez, mademoiselle." Ruth stood. She was pale, but she stood as straight as a candle. "Dr. Halcombe did not kill my guardian. I did." The confession fell into the silence like a stone into deep water. Lady Chevenix gave a small animal cry. Hugo Trent swore under his breath. Venetia Kerr's cigarette dropped, unnoticed, burning a tiny hole in the carpet. Ruth went on quietly, as though reciting something rehearsed in the dark for months. "I discovered the German contract in August. I begged him, on my knees I begged him not to sell. He laughed at first, said the money would secure my future. Then he grew angry. He said I was a child who understood nothing of the world in 1936. He said Britain was finished, that the future belonged to strength, not sentiment. He said," her voice cracked, but only for an instant, "he said I was the only thing he had ever loved more than his work, and even I would not stop him." She drew a long breath. "I could not kill him with my hands. I am not strong, and he would have known. So I chose the headphones. He had shown me the experimental pair weeks earlier, how the earpieces sealed perfectly, how one heard oneself from the edge of space. I stole Digitalin from Dr. Halcombe's surgery. I practiced the injection on oranges until the needle left no mark. I built the little solenoid myself. He had taught me years ago when I was his laboratory daughter. I hid it in the right earpiece because I knew he would reverse them. The left ear was deaf. The right ear would hear England one last time." Poirot's face had not changed, yet something in his eyes flickered. Pity, perhaps, or recognition. "On the night," Ruth continued, "I went to the transmitting hall at 11:03. No one saw me. The maid was flirting with the footman. I lifted the headphones he had placed ready, substituted mine in the dark, and left. At 11:11, the clock struck. My clock set fast by 6 minutes. The needle moved. He died pressing the key that was meant to sell Britain's future. I thought I had saved my country." She smiled then, a small, terrible smile. "But yesterday he forgave me. Yesterday he changed the will and gave everything to England freely. My murder became meaningless. Worse, it became the act of a child who killed the father she adored, because she could not wait one day for him to redeem himself." She turned to Halcombe, who had lifted his head and was staring at her in horror. "I'm sorry, Doctor. You guessed part of it, enough to try to shield me by confusing the evidence. The broadcasts, the glove on the tower, the notepaper in your basket. Yours was the kindness that tried to take my guilt upon itself. But I cannot let you hang for me." Halcombe tried to speak. No words came. Ruth faced Poirot again. "You knew, didn't you? From the first." "I suspected," Poirot corrected softly. "The prints on the clock were small, yes, but the span, the distance between thumb and little finger, was a woman's. The torn page from the foxglove book had a pressed violet between the leaves. Only one person in this house presses flowers, yourself. And the final broadcast, the cello phrase from Nimrod, he taught you to play that variation when you were 14. No one else could have chosen it." He stepped closer. "But there was one thing I did not understand. Why the German phrases? Why make it look like espionage?" Ruth's eyes filled at last. "Because I could not bear for him to die dishonoured. If the Gauti world believed the Germans killed him to silence a traitor, then his last act, changing the will, giving the invention to Britain, would be remembered as heroism. He would die a martyr, not a fool who listened to a child's tantrum. I used Hugo's recordings. He had made them as a party trick. I climbed the tower twice to broadcast them. I wanted his name clean, even if my soul was black." She held out her wrists. "I'm ready." The room was so quiet, they could hear the rain beginning again on the glass roof, soft as tears. Poirot did not move to take her wrists. Instead, he reached into his pocket and drew out a single sheet of paper. Sir Gervas's handwriting, the same as the note found on the tower. "Tell Ruth the frequency was always hers." He held it out to her. "Your guardian left this in the transmitter logbook, timed and dated yesterday afternoon. He knew, mademoiselle. He knew everything, your campaign, the headphones, the clock. And still he put them on. Still he pressed the key at 11:11. Ruth stared at the note as though it burned. "He chose," Poirot said quietly, "to die in such a way that your patriotism would be proved right, and his own earlier weakness erased forever. He gave you the only gift left in his power, a clean conscience and an England saved twice, once by your courage, once by his sacrifice." Ruth's legs gave way. She sank to her knees on the steel floor, the note fluttering from her fingers. For the first time since the murder, she wept, truly wept, tears that sounded like breaking glass. Poirot turned to Japp. "There will be no arrest tonight, mon ami. Some frequencies, once transmitted, can never be silenced by courts of law." He looked once more at the girl sobbing among the silent valves and meters. "Some murders," he said almost inaudibly, "are acts of love too great for the statute books." Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the tower clean. Chapter 9. The final transmission. They gathered at dawn, not in the transmitting hall, but in the great hall itself, where the Tudor rafters still carried the faint smell of 400-year-old oak and last night's peat smoke. The storm had passed. Pale October sunlight slanted through the high windows and struck the suit of armour that had guarded the house since Elizabeth's reign. It looked, Hastings thought, as though the old knight were waiting for the verdict. Poirot stood on the minstrel's gallery, small and neat, hands clasped behind his back. Below him, in a loose half-circle, were the survivors. Lady Chevenix, hollow-eyed in black. Venetia Kerr, cigarette unlit for once. Hugo Trent, pale and silent. Dr. Halcombe, wrists bandaged now with clean linen. Inspector Japp, awkward in the presence of something larger than police procedure. And Ruth Chevenix, pale as parchment, dressed in the same black velvet she had worn on the night of the broadcast. Poirot's voice, when it came, was quiet yet carried, to every corner. "Mesdames et messieurs, the law demands a murderer. The heart sometimes demands something else. Last night, Mademoiselle Ruth believed she had confessed to the perfect crime. Today, we must decide whether any crime was committed at all. He descended the oak stairs slowly, each footfall deliberate. Let us speak plainly. Sir Gervase Chevenix discovered, 24 hours before his death, that his ward, his beloved Ruth, had prepared a deadly device in the headphones. He found the substituted pair in his study drawer. He recognized her workmanship. She had been his pupil since childhood. He understood everything. The digitalin, the clock set fast, the solenoid triggered by the strike and the carrier surge together. He understood the reason. Love turned to fury by what she believed was treason. Ruth made a small sound, half sob, half protest. Yet he said nothing, Poirot continued. Instead, he rewrote his will, bequeathing the vital connection to Britain. Then he placed the fatal headphones on the desk himself, exactly where she had intended them to be. At 11:11, he put them on, reversed, as always, and pressed the silver key. The needle entered the ear that could still hear England. He died smiling, because he had chosen the manner and the meaning of his own death. Lady Chevenix lifted her head. "You are saying my husband killed himself?" "I am saying, madame, that he allowed himself to be killed. There is a difference, subtle but absolute. In the eyes of the law, it is suicide. In the eyes of the heart, it is sacrifice." He turned to Ruth. "He left 3 messages, all intended for you alone. The first, the new will. The second, the note on the tower. Tell Ruth the frequency was always hers. The third you have not yet heard." Poirot gestured. Hastings, with visible reluctance, crossed to the ancient gramophone in the corner. He wound the handle, lowered the needle. Sir Gervase's voice, unmistakably his own, recorded yesterday afternoon when the house believed him to be resting, filled the hall. "Ruth, my dear child, if you are hearing this, then everything has happened as we both feared and hoped. You tried to save England with a murder. I have saved you with a suicide. Do not mourn the manner. Rejoice in the result. The invention is safe, your conscience is clean, and my name, thanks to the little drama we have staged together, will be remembered as that of a patriot, not a fool who almost sold his country. Forgive me for the pain I caused you. Forgive yourself for the pain you believed you caused me. Between us there was never anything but love, and love, properly tuned, is the strongest carrier wave of all. Be happy, little Ruth. The frequency was always yours, your loving guardian Gervase." The record ended with a soft click. No one moved. Poirot spoke into the silence. "The coroner will record death by misadventure, heart failure brought on by overexcitement during the experiment. The headphones will be found to have a faulty wire. Dr. Halcombe will confirm the digitalin was taken accidentally months ago and destroyed. The clock will have stopped at 11:17 through no human agency. England will receive her gift without scandal. 2 reputations, one living, one dead, will remain unsullied." He looked at Japp. The inspector met his eyes for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. Ruth walked forward, as though sleepwalking. She picked up the note Poirot had laid on the table. "Tell Ruth the frequency was always hers," and pressed it to her lips. "I thought I had killed him," she whispered. "He let me believe it, so that I would never have to carry the guilt of having driven him to despair. All this time he was protecting me, even from myself." Poirot inclined his head. "The truest vital connection, mademoiselle, is not steel and valves. It is the one between 2 hearts that refuse to be parted by death." Lady Chevenix rose suddenly. She crossed to Ruth and, after a moment's hesitation, took the girl in her arms. Ruth stiffened, then collapsed against her, weeping at last without restraint. Venetia Kerr stubbed out her unlit cigarette and walked to the window. Hugo Trent stared at the floor. Dr. Halcombe closed his eyes, tears slipping silently down the plump cheeks. Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, our work is done." As they moved toward the door, the great transmitter in the West Wing, now under military guard, came briefly to life one final time. No operator touched the key, yet across the quiet hall drifted 3 soft notes of Morse, clear as bells. SOS reversed, or, to those who listen with the heart, GOD, then silence, perfect and complete. Outside, the aerial tower caught the first rays of the sun and flung them across the downs like a promise. Chapter 10. Epilogue. A Clear Channel. 3 months later, on a bitter January morning in 1937, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stood once more beneath the great aerial at Abbott's Hollow. The tower had been painted battleship grey, the red aircraft lamp replaced by a steady green beacon that flashed every 10 seconds across the frozen downs. A discreet brass plate now adorned the gatehouse. Government Research Establishment, Ministry of Defence, no admittance. The house itself had changed little. The Tudor front still glowed like warm bread in the winter sun, but the modern wing had been extended, and everywhere one saw the quiet bustle of men in uniform, who spoke in low voices and carried clipboards instead of rifles. The vital connection now broadcast the BBC Empire service to the farthest corners of the earth, without a whisper of interference. On clear nights, they said, one could hear Sydney answering London as clearly as if the city stood across a village green. Poirot and Hastings had been invited, officially invited, for the formal handover of the Chevenix patents to the Crown. A small ceremony in the Long Gallery. The Lord Privy Seal, a handful of admirals, and Ruth Chevenix, pale but composed in mourning, black relieved by a single white gardenia at the throat. She had signed the documents with a steady hand. The invention was no longer hers. It had never truly been Sir Gervas's. It belonged now to the country they had both tried, in their different ways, to save. After the speeches and the champagne, Poirot had taken only half a glass. Ruth asked if she might walk with them to the rose garden. The roses were bare, black thorns against the chalky sky, but the Michaelmas daisies still held a few defiant flowers. She spoke first. "They have offered me a post here. Research. I start in April. They say I have my guardian's gift for valves and circuits." She attempted a smile. "I think he would be pleased." Poirot inclined his head. "He is pleased, mademoiselle. Of that I am certain." They walked in silence for a while, boots crunching on frost. "I still wake sometimes," Ruth said suddenly, "thinking I hear the carrier wave, that low, steady hum before the valves warm. And for a moment I believe he is alive, leaning over my shoulder, correcting my soldering. Then I remember the note. The frequency was always yours, and I understand that he is still there, just on a different wavelength." Hastings cleared his throat, embarrassed by the lump that had risen in it. Poirot merely nodded. "The dead do not leave us, mon enfant. They simply change modulation." They had reached the stone bench where, 3 months earlier, Ruth had confessed everything. She sat now without hesitation. "I have something for you, Monsieur Poirot." She drew from her pocket a small bakelite box no larger than a matchbox. Inside, wrapped in cotton wool, lay the tiny solenoid and glass phial, the heart of the murder weapon, cleaned, sterilized, harmless. "I kept it," she said, "not as a relic of guilt, but as a reminder that love can be lethal, and that forgiveness can be louder than any transmitter ever built. I want you to have it. You understood before I did." Poirot accepted the box with grave courtesy. He slipped it into his waistcoat pocket next to his heart. "Merci, mademoiselle. It will remind me also that the most dangerous weapon is not digital but the human capacity for self-sacrifice." They rose to leave. At the gate, a ministry car waited to take them to the station. Ruth walked with them as far as the gravel sweep. "One last thing," she said. She reached up and, before Poirot could protest, kissed him lightly on both cheeks. Old-fashioned, continental, the gesture of a daughter. "Thank you for giving me back my father," she whispered, "and for letting me keep him." Poirot's eyes were suspiciously bright. He removed his hat and bowed, very low. "Au revoir, ma petite. Transmit always on the side of the angels." The car bore them, away down the long drive between leafless limes. Hastings watched the house dwindle in the rear window until only the tower remained, a thin steel finger pointing at the pale sky. "Well, Poirot," he said at last, "another triumph for the little grey cells? Though I confess I'm still not sure whether we solved a murder or prevented one." Poirot gazed out at the passing downs, white with rime. "We solved a love story, mon ami. The rest was mere static." At the station, they had 20 minutes to wait. Poirot bought tea from the buffet, strong orange-coloured, served in thick railway cups, and carried it to a bench beneath the hissing gas lamps. "Tell me, Poirot," Hastings said suddenly, "do you believe in ghosts? Those broadcasts after death, the cello phrase, the Morse, could they really have been Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Hastings, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. But there are also more things in the human heart. Sometimes a man who knows he has only hours left will prepare messages that outlive him. Sometimes a house that has listened for decades refuses to forget the voice it loved best. And sometimes," he smiled, a small secret smile, "sometimes Hercule Poirot prefers not to examine the circuitry too closely, lest the miracle be reduced to wires and wax." The London train steamed in, exactly on time. As they climbed aboard, the guard's whistle sounded 3 short blasts, almost, but not quite, like Morse. Poirot paused on the step. "Listen," he said softly. Faintly, beneath the hiss of steam and the clamour of the platform, came a carrier wave, a low, steady hum that seemed to rise from the very rails. And for an instant, just an instant, 2 voices could be heard, perfectly modulated, perfectly clear, speaking together across the quiet English morning. The frequency was always yours. Then the train pulled away, gathering speed, and the hum faded into the ordinary noises of the world. Poirot settled into his corner seat, folded his hands across his stomach, and closed his eyes. Somewhere, very far above the frozen fields, a great aerial turned slowly toward the rising sun, listening, always listening, for the one clear channel that can never be jammed.